你的提问充满了对中国的偏见和所谓不知道从什么地方来的傲慢，我是完全不能接受的。
I have to say that your question is full of prejudice and against China and arrogance, where I don't know where that come from.
Apart from being a useful word in general, 傲慢 is a great example of the type of vocabulary you will not learn from textbooks, you will not learn from official vocabulary lists, you will not learn from university courses, but it is in fact a word in very frequent, very common usage that you need to know. So this word is not found in the HSK list, and most of the textbooks used in university programs are directly based on the HSK vocabulary list, and it's also not found in the TOEFL vocabulary list, the Taiwanese competitor to HSK. So this is a really important, really commonly used word that the politician employs here that you need to know in Chinese. But there's this strange implicit sense of censorship in terms of what gets into the textbooks and what doesn't. So this kind of slightly insulting vocabulary just does not make it into the lessons for foreigners. And it's a word you really need to know. So this is one of many reasons why studying the Chinese language as it is used by members of the Chinese Communist government is useful and instructive. Of course, we also learn something about the reality of the political situation in China. So the sentence he says, and you're going to hear it again later in this video, or if you want to, you can rewind, of course, and hear it again at the start of the video, is 我不知从什么地方来的傲慢. Now he says it much more rapidly than I do. This arrogance, like, I don't even know where it's coming from. And structurally, the part of that sentence that's difficult for a foreigner to remember is the use of lie. So, from where, from what place it's coming. 从什么地方来, we would naturally tend to leave out the lie. And of course, if you're a beginner in Chinese, it is a little bit strange to us that 傲慢 is at the very end of the sentence, but the more you speak, read, and write Chinese, the more normal that starts to seem. So a very simple sentence in terms of how people actually use 傲慢in spoken Chinese, 他太傲慢了. So it's very clear that this is complaining. It's not merely a descriptive statement of fact. It has a negative connotation. You can pair 傲慢 with 对. You can say something like 他对我们太傲慢了 or something like this. 他对我很傲慢. I searched around the internet and I found that type of sentence construction was only appearing in textbooks, was only appearing in lessons given to foreigners, and that Chinese people themselves were not using it, at least not in written speech on the internet. So this is another way in which textbooks and official word lists, official vocabulary lists, can be misleading in terms of how people actually use the language. No reason for it. I'm not saying you can't pair 傲慢 with 对, but it's worthwhile to take that moment and check if the examples you're working from in a dictionary or textbook, if they're misleading or not. In this case, they are. But there's a simple usage of 傲慢. And here's a slightly more literary-sounding example. This comes from a newspaper article. So the arrogance and bias of the concept of pure literature, right? 春, the same 春 we know from 春书, 春文学的傲慢与偏见.
There are no shortage of concerns about China's treatment of human rights advocates, such as the Hong Kong booksellers. Given these concerns, why is Canada pursuing closer ties with China? How do you plan to use that relationship to improve human rights and security in the region? And did you specifically raise the case of the Garretts during your discussions with the foreign minister today?
I want to make a response to the questions asked by this journalist about China.
你的提问充满了对中国的偏见。
Most of these official statements from the Chinese government are using level 1 vocabulary most of the time. They state their meaning very plainly in very plain language. So beginner and intermediate students really can start learning by studying what's going on in the world's most densely populated dictatorship and tyranny at a pretty early stage development language. So here's Tiwen. Tiwen, this could have been the first word you ever learned in the classroom, because teachers tend to use it quite a lot. It's a complex sentence that it appears in, though. So, 你的提问对中国, I just remind you that normally you're going to be pairing the verb 提问 with 想. So, 没有人向她提问. Nobody had any questions for her. There wasn't anybody who asked her any questions. This is the kind of construction you would expect, but here in a more complex sentence, we have 对, but it's not a question being asked to China. So the function of 对 here is completely different from the level 1 use of 想.
你的提问充满了对中国的偏见。
When you break it into pieces, this sentence is not too hard, not even for a beginner. 偏见 that I've highlighted in red at the end of the sentence, this is prejudice, bias, very negative word, very negative connotations. Sometimes in English we describe something as being biased in a very neutral or even scientific sense. No. This is a word with lots of negative connotations. However, the other crucial word here that effectively functions like a verb in the sentence is 充满, right? So 你的提问充满了对中国的偏见, right? Your question is brimming with contempt. Your question is permeated with prejudice. But the interesting thing is that 充满 normally has a positive connotation. It can be used with positive or negative connotations, but it is more frequently found in sentences like, being full of joy, full of hope, full of optimism, full of laughter. His smile was full of warmth, this kind of thing.
和所谓不知道从什么地方来的傲慢，我是完全不能接受的。你去过中国吗？
So you get here a sense of the brutal simplicity of the Chinese authoritarian style, and it makes it much easier for level 1 students to approach. He's here saying, in the simplest terms possible, have you ever even been to China? Obviously meant as a reproach to the journalist. In reality, if the journalist would then say that she's actually lived in China for 10 or 20 years and has a PhD in the topic, he's still going to reject her opinion, so it's really irrelevant, it's just rhetoric.
你知道中国从一个一穷二白的面貌，把6亿以上的人摆脱了贫困吗？你知道中国现在已经成为人均$8000的一个世界第2大经济体吗？
This 4-character phrase you see on screen has been used at least since 1956, when it was written by the dictator Mao Zedong himself. And this gives the sense of the Chinese people being poor and blank, literally poor and white, but this is white in the sense of a blank sheet of paper specifically. So Chinese is full of these 4-character phrases that normally harken back to a specific literary source. In this case, this is specifically Chinese communist authoritarian jargon. So this line of reasoning, this type of excuse-making, still very common with American left-wingers, with European socialists and communists. Any evils on the part of the Chinese government can be excused because of this claim that they've allegedly lifted people out of poverty and backwardness, we might say in English. But when the question is asked, why don't these people get to vote? Why don't they have elections? Why don't they have freedom of speech? Why can't they criticize the government in newspapers? Oh, well, do you even realize that we helped to lift 6 million people out of poverty?
如果我们不能够很好的保护人权的话，中国能取得这么大的发展吗？你知道中国已经把保护人权列入到我们的宪法当中吗？
As you learn more and more vocabulary in Chinese, you also learn more ways to structure a sentence. And that's why you have to learn each piece of vocabulary along with some examples of how it's used and how it is not used. So 当中 here does not appear at the beginning of the sentence the way most locative particles do, the way you normally state the location of something. So he leaves it until the end of the sentence to say, don't you even know that human rights are protected in the Constitution of China? Okay, so 宪法, Constitution, and you could guess the meaning here because 法 is law, also used to mean France. France is the country of laws, 法国. So, 宪法 Constitution. In the Constitution, human rights have been protected. So it's a little bit of a complex sentence structure with ba. All right, I admit, this is not an easy sentence. They're not all easy, guys. But in the Constitution, human rights are already protected. Don't you even know that? Well, I encourage all of you to take the time to read the Constitution of China. You're in for some big surprises because according to the Constitution, everyone in China also gets to vote. They get to elect the government. So there are a lot of things promised to you in the Constitution of China, rights that people don't get to exercise, privileges the people of China have never received. But sure, your human rights, along with and including universal suffrage and the right to vote, are written down on paper in the Constitution of China, where they are ignored by everyone, not just this particular journalist.
我要告诉你，最了解中国的人权的状况，不是你，而是中国人自己。你没有发言权，而中国有发言权。
Do you know that China has written protection and promotion of human rights into our constitution? And those who other people don't know better than the Chinese people about the human rights condition in China. And it's the Chinese people who are in the best situation, in the best position to have say about China's human rights situation. So I would like to suggest to you that please don't ask questions in such an irresponsible manner. And we welcome goodwill suggestions, but we reject groundless or unwarranted accusations.